300 of the wealthiest people in Manhattan, sitting in a ballroom dripping with crystal chandeliers, champagne towers, and old money. And one man just stepped up to that microphone and said the words no one in that room will ever forget. One more word about her skin, and it is your last. The man speaking was a Korean Mafia boss, tattoos crawling up his neck, dragons, waves, ancient symbols, a black ruby ring on his finger, a suit tailored in Milan, and eyes that had watched men disappear and never lost a second of sleep over it. The woman he was defending was a beautiful black woman in a champagne gold gown, a Juilliard-trained cellist, the most talented person in that room, and the only one who had been treated like she did not belong. They called her exotic. They questioned how she got into Juilliard. They suggested she should be on the stage performing, not sitting among them. They smiled while they said it, because cruelty always wears a smile to formal events. She sat through every single cut with her chin raised and her spine straight, and she did not break. But the man beside her, the one they whispered about, the one whose real name made powerful men in Seoul and Tokyo lose sleep, he was not sitting through anything. He was counting. And when the host of the gala made one final joke about her skin in front of 300 people, the Viper stopped counting and started collecting. What he did next did not just silence that room. It destroyed a 3-generation legacy in under 5 minutes. And the man who owned that legacy was still standing on the stage when it happened. But to understand how a Korean mafia boss ended up defending a black woman from Brooklyn in a room full of billionaires, and why what he did changed everything, you need to hear this story from the beginning. Before starting the story, comment down below where you are watching from and what time it is there. If stories of karma, love, and hidden truths move you, leave a like, be sure to subscribe to the channel, and click join to become a member and help our channel. The grand ballroom of the Waldorf Astoria had survived 100 years of secrets. It had held presidents and criminals, sometimes in the same chair. It had witnessed fortunes pledged and reputations destroyed between the first course and the last. Its crystal chandelier, 20,000 hand-cut pieces imported from Vienna in 1923, had looked down upon every shade of human ambition, and it had never once flinched. Tonight, 312 guests filled its marble stomach. The annual Harrington Foundation Charity Gala. Black tie. Invitation only. $50,000 per table. The kind of event where the champagne cost more than some people earned in a month, and where the word charity was used so often it had lost all meaning. And into that room, at exactly 7:41 in the evening, walked a woman who was not supposed to be there. Not according to the guest list. Her name was on it. Serena Elise Mitchell, Table 3. But the guest list was not the problem. The problem was something older than guest lists, older than charity galas, older than the chandelier itself. The problem was the color of her skin. She entered on the arm of a man whose name most people in the room recognized, and none of them fully understood. Park Jun-ho, 41 years old, CEO of Haejin Global Holdings, a legitimate import and export company dealing in rare wines, luxury timepieces, and Asian fine art. That was the version printed on business cards. The other version, the one whispered in certain circles in Los Angeles, Seoul, and Tokyo, involved a different kind of trade entirely. The kind that made men rich and made other men disappear. Jun-ho walked the way a panther walks through tall grass, unhurried, aware. Every muscle relaxed and every sense on fire. He wore a black suit, Italian cut, tailored in Milan by a man who asked no questions and charged no prices, because Jun-ho had once done him a favor that could not be repaid with money. Black shirt beneath, no tie. the top two buttons open, revealing what no amount of tailoring could hide: the tattoos. Dragons and ocean waves and ancient characters in Hanja script, climbing both sides of his neck like smoke rising from a fire that burned somewhere deep inside him. On his left wrist, a Patek Philippe nautilus in rose gold, catching the chandelier light with each step. On the pinky finger of his right hand, a gold ring set with a black ruby, the color of dried blood. He did not smile as he entered. He did not need to. Serena walked beside him, and the first thing the room noticed was not her posture, not the architectural elegance of her champagne gold gown, not the way the satin caught the light and draped her slender frame as though it had been poured onto her body by a Renaissance sculptor. The first thing the room noticed was her skin. Deep, dark, rich. The darkest shade of ebony, luminous and unapologetic, glowing under the chandelier like polished mahogany kissed by firelight. Her hair, natural and textured, coiled in a high sculptural bun that added 2 inches to her already regal height. Gold drop earrings with small diamonds framing a face that belonged on the ceiling of a cathedral. Full lips in deep wine. Eyes that burned with the quiet, controlled fury of a woman who had spent her entire life being measured by the wrong things. The room did not go silent when they entered. That would have been too honest. Instead, it did something worse. It adjusted. Conversations dipped half a volume. Eyes traveled sideways without turning heads. Smiles tightened by fractions of millimeters. The orchestra on the mezzanine kept playing Debussy, but the music suddenly felt like a mask. Serena felt every single shift. She had spent 29 years learning the vocabulary of these silences. She knew the difference between a room that paused in admiration and a room that paused in calculation. This was calculation. Who is she? Why is she here? Who let her in? Little did anyone in that glittering room know that the woman they were quietly dismissing had performed Elgar's cello concerto at Lincoln Center at the age of 22. That she had graduated from the Juilliard School not through any program, not through any initiative, not through any well-meaning effort at inclusion, but through the sheer, undeniable, ferocious force of her talent. That she had auditioned against 214 candidates, and that the head of the admissions panel had written, in his private notes, a single word next to her name: extraordinary. But none of that mattered in this room. In this room, she was measured by something she could not audition her way out of. Junho felt the atmosphere change the way a sailor feels the wind shift before a storm. He did not look at Serena. He did not squeeze her arm. He did not offer reassurance, because reassurance would mean acknowledging that there was something to fear. And Park Junho had not brought this woman into this room to be afraid. Instead, he did something far more deliberate. He slowed his pace. 1 step per second became 1 step per 2 seconds. He forced the room to look longer. If they were going to stare, they would stare on his terms. 3 of his men had already taken their positions. Kwan, 1.90 meters of controlled violence in a charcoal suit, stood near the east entrance with his hands folded and his eyes scanning in a continuous, mechanical sweep. A second man, younger, leaner, positioned himself near the kitchen corridor. A third, the oldest of the group, with gray at his temples and scars on his knuckles, stood 4 meters from the main stage with his arms crossed. They looked like private security for any wealthy guest. They were not. Table 3 waited for them like a throne and a trap at the same time. It was the closest table to the stage, the most visible in the room, the seat of honor. And seated already at that very table, with a crystal glass of Macallan 25 in his soft, uncalloused hand, was the man who had arranged every detail of this evening, down to the font on the place cards. Prescott William Harrington III. He was 58 years old, and he had never once in his life done anything that his great-grandfather had not made possible. The Harrington fortune was real estate and banking, built in the 1920s, expanded in the 50s, and maintained ever since by lawyers, accountants, and the unshakable conviction that blood was the only currency that truly mattered. Prescott administered not the money, but the image. He was the face at galas, the name on museum wings, the signature on donation checks that were always large enough to photograph and never large enough to hurt. He sat with the posture of a man who owned the room because his name was on the invitation. His tuxedo was classic black with satin lapels. His shirt was white and starched to the rigidity of armor. His bow tie was perfectly symmetrical. A white silk pocket square bloomed from his breast pocket like a surrender flag that had never been used. Gold cufflinks bearing the Harrington family crest caught the light each time he raised his glass, which was often. Beside him sat Caroline Ann Whitmore, 52, wife of Senator James Whitmore of Connecticut. Her smile was wide and constant and reached absolutely nowhere near her eyes. Her blonde hair, platinum and precise, was pulled into a low chignon that looked less like a hairstyle and more like an architectural decision. Her navy blue gown was haute couture, long-sleeved with lace overlay, conservative in cut and devastating in cost. A triple strand of pearls circled her throat. Pearl and diamond earrings hung from her lobes. Her clutch, rectangular navy velvet with a silver clasp, sat on the table like a small, expensive coffin. And then there was Chad, Charles Beaumont IV, whom no one had ever called Charles because Chad was easier to yell across a polo field. 34 years old, son of an oil magnate from Houston. He had the body of a man who went to the gym for the mirror, not the discipline. Blonde, square jaw, artificially tanned, teeth so white they looked like they had been installed rather than grown. Green eyes with nothing behind them. He wore a dark blue slim-fit suit, white shirt open to the third button, as if the room needed to see his chest, no tie, an Audemars Piguet Royal Oak on his wrist, and a glass of champagne in his hand that was never empty because he never noticed when the waiters refilled it. Chad was the kind of man who had been born on third base and spent his entire life telling people he had hit a triple. Junho reached the table. He pulled out Serena's chair before she could reach for it. Not because she could not do it herself, because he wanted every person watching to see that he treated her with a reverence that had nothing to do with ownership and everything to do with respect. Serena sat, back straight, chin level, hands folded on the white linen tablecloth. The thin gold bracelet on her right wrist caught the light, and the inscription in Korean faced upward, though no one at the table could read it. Prescott Harrington leaned forward, the whiskey tilting gently in his glass, his small blue eyes moving from Junho to Serena and back again with the leisurely assessment of a man browsing an auction catalog. "Ah, Mr. Park. Always a pleasure. I see you've brought company." The pause before company lasted exactly half a second longer than it should have. It was a surgeon's cut. Precise, intentional, designed to wound without leaving a visible mark. Junho took Prescott's extended hand without sitting down. He squeezed, not enough to cause pain, enough to communicate that pain was available if needed. He smiled with his lips. His eyes remained exactly what they always were. Two dark windows into a room where mercy was not stored. "Serena Mitchell," Junho said. His voice was calm, measured, and carried the quiet authority of a man who never repeated himself. Violoncellist, Juilliard graduate. One of the finest musicians I have ever had the privilege of hearing. He did not say my girlfriend. He did not say my date. He did not say my companion. He said who she was, what she had earned, What she had built with her own hands on the strings of an instrument that did not care about the color of the hands that played it. Prescott's eyebrows rose by precisely 2 millimeters, the universal expression of a man pretending to be impressed while privately deciding he was not. Juilliard. How lovely. He turned his gaze to Serena with a smile that was all teeth and no warmth. They've been doing wonderful work with their diversity initiatives, haven't they? The sentence landed on the table like acid poured slowly onto silk. It did not burn immediately. It soaked in. It spread. And by the time you noticed the damage, the fabric was already gone. Serena felt the heat rise through her neck. Not shame. Never shame. Something hotter. Something with teeth. But she had spent 17 years learning to turn that heat into ice. And so she looked at Prescott Harrington III with the same expression she used when a string went out of tune during a performance. Professional irritation. I got in on merit, she said. Her voice was level, controlled. A perfect horizontal line drawn across the chaos beneath it. But thank you for the curiosity. Caroline Whitmore, who had been watching the exchange with the focused attention of a vulture circling something that was not yet dead, let out a small laugh behind her champagne glass. It was the kind of laugh that was not a laugh at all. It was a verdict. What none of them knew, what not a single soul in that glittering, perfumed, self-congratulating room could have possibly known, was that Park Joon-ho had arrived at this gala with more than a beautiful woman on his arm. He had arrived with a plan that had been set in motion 6 weeks earlier, that involved 14 phone calls, 3 offshore accounts, 2 corporate attorneys in Delaware, and a single, devastating acquisition that would be finalized before dessert was served. The Viper had not come to attend the gala. He had come to end an empire. And the empire did not even know it was already dead. The first hour moved the way all first hours move at events designed for people who have too much money and not enough honesty. Slowly, deliberately, with the careful choreography of a ballroom dance where everyone knows the steps and no one means a single one of them. Serena navigated the room the way a soldier navigates a minefield while wearing heels. Every interaction was a test. Every introduction, a tribunal. Every smile aimed in her direction carried a second meaning tucked behind it, like a blade hidden inside a bouquet of flowers. A woman in emeralds approached her near the champagne station. She was perhaps 60, with the kind of face that had been lifted so many times it had lost its original architecture. Her name was something hyphenated and forgettable. She held Serena's hand a moment too long and tilted her head at an angle that suggested fascination and condescension in equal measure. Where are you from, dear? The question arrived gift-wrapped in politeness, but Serena could smell the real question underneath it. She had been smelling it her entire life. It was not about geography. It was about justification. Explain yourself. Account for your presence. Provide the paperwork that proves you deserve to breathe the same air. Brooklyn, Serena said. The woman blinked. Her smile tightened by a fraction. No, I meant originally. Brooklyn, Serena repeated. She did not blink. She did not elaborate. She held the woman's gaze with the steady, unblinking focus of someone who had decided, long ago, that she would not perform the dance of self-explanation for anyone who was not willing to examine their own question first. The woman withdrew her hand, laughed a laugh that meant nothing, excused herself to find someone who would give a more satisfying answer. Joon-ho was 3 meters away, engaged in conversation with a Japanese investment banker whose name he already knew and whose portfolio he had already studied. But his eyes returned to Serena every 30 seconds with the mechanical precision of a lighthouse beam sweeping a dark coastline. He was counting. Not minutes, not drinks. He was counting the cuts. Each micro-incision the room made into Serena's dignity, he cataloged and filed in a place inside himself where debts were stored and interest compounded at a rate that no one in this room could afford. The second hour brought the dinner service, and with it, the particular cruelty that only proximity can manufacture. The seating arrangement at table 3 was not accidental. Prescott Harrington had personally approved every placement card, every name, every adjacency. He had placed Serena directly across from Caroline Whitmore, which was the social equivalent of placing a lamb across from a wolf and calling it a dinner party. The first course arrived. A delicate arrangement of seared scallops on a bed of cauliflower puree, drizzled with truffle oil that cost more per ounce than most perfumes. The waiters moved with silent, practiced precision, placing each plate with the reverence of priests handling relics. Caroline watched Serena pick up her fork with the kind of attention that suggested she was looking for an error. A wrong utensil, a wrong gesture. Anything that could be cataloged and weaponized. She found nothing. Serena's table manners were impeccable. Not because she had been trained for rooms like this, but because her grandmother, a woman who had cleaned houses in Flatbush for 40 years, had insisted that her granddaughter would never give anyone the satisfaction of finding fault in her grace. Little did Caroline know that the woman sitting across from her had been trained by something far more rigorous than finishing school. Serena had been trained by a lifetime of being watched. Watched in classrooms. Watched in concert halls. Watched in restaurants, in stores, in elevators, in every room she had ever entered where her presence was treated as a question that required an answer. Caroline leaned forward during the second course, a roasted quail with blackberry reduction, and fixed Serena with a smile that was all architecture and no foundation. "Darling, that bracelet is absolutely stunning." She gestured toward the thin gold band on Serena's right wrist with a manicured finger tipped in pale pink. "A gift from him, I imagine?" Her chin tilted almost imperceptibly toward Junho, who was speaking in low tones with a Swiss commodities trader 2 seats to his left. "These Asian men do love to pamper their companions. It's cultural, isn't it? They like women who are, how shall I put it, compliant." The sentence was a fragmentation grenade wrapped in silk and sprayed with Chanel. It detonated in 3 directions simultaneously. It reduced Junho to a racial caricature. It reduced Serena to a purchased accessory. And it reduced their relationship to a transaction between a man who bought obedience and a woman who sold it. The table heard it. 2 guests at adjacent seats suddenly became very interested in their quail. A man in a gray suit across the table cleared his throat and reached for his wineglass with the urgency of someone searching for an exit. Serena set her fork down. Not dropped it. Not slammed it. Set it down with the deliberate precision of a musician placing a bow on a rest. She looked at Caroline Whitmore with an expression that Caroline had never received from anyone in her carefully curated social universe. Genuine, undiluted, architectural contempt. "The bracelet says unbreakable in Korean," Serena said. Her voice did not rise. It did not waver. It held its pitch the way a perfectly tuned cello string holds a note, vibrating with controlled power that could shatter glass if released. "He gave it to me after hearing me perform Elgar's cello concerto. He cried. I don't know if that's cultural. I know it's human." Caroline's champagne glass stopped halfway to her lips. For 1 second, one fractional, fleeting second, something moved behind her eyes. It might have been shame. It might have been recognition. It might have been the faintest echo of a conscience that had been buried so deep beneath pearl necklaces and committee chairmanships that it had almost suffocated entirely. But women like Caroline Whitmore had built entire civilizations on top of their shame, and she was not about to let a crack appear in front of 300 witnesses. "How sweet," Caroline said, and turned to the man on her left to discuss the upcoming auction items as though nothing had happened at all. Jun-ho had heard every word. He had not turned his head. He had not interrupted his conversation. He had continued speaking to the Swiss trader about shipping routes through the South China Sea, with the same steady, measured cadence he always used. But beneath the table, his left hand had closed into a fist so tight that the tendons stood out against the skin like cables on a suspension bridge. The black ruby on his pinky finger pressed into his palm hard enough to leave a mark. He was still counting. The cuts were adding up. And then, between the third course and the fourth, between the lamb with rosemary reduction and the artisanal cheese selection, Chad Beaumont arrived at the table with all the subtlety of a freight train entering a library. He had been drinking since 6. Not heavily, not by his standards, but enough to strip away whatever thin layer of social calculation might have existed between his thoughts and his mouth. He approached from behind Serena's chair, champagne glass in hand, his 2 interchangeable friends trailing behind him like pilot fish following a shark that had never actually hunted anything on its own. He leaned on the back of an empty chair, his body angled toward Serena with the lazy, proprietary confidence of a man who had never been told that his proximity was unwelcome. "So," Chad said, his green eyes traveling down Serena's body with the shameless inventory of a man appraising livestock at a county fair. "You're the girl with the Chinese guy?" The sentence was 7 words long. It contained 2 insults and 0 awareness. Girl, Chinese. 1 word reduced a Juilliard-trained musician to a possession. The other erased the nationality, history, and identity of a man who could have had Chad Beaumont removed from this room, this city, and this life with a single phone call. Serena felt the impact land in her sternum like a physical blow. Not because it was clever, because it was so ordinary, so casual, so utterly unremarkable in its cruelty. Chad Beaumont had not even tried to be original. He had simply reached into the shallow, stagnant pool of assumptions he had been swimming in since birth and pulled out the first thing his hand touched. Before she could form a response, a shadow moved in her peripheral vision. Quan, who had been standing 11 meters away near the east wall, took 1 step forward. His right hand moved toward the inside of his jacket with the instinctive, practiced motion of a man whose body had been trained to respond to threats before his brain had finished identifying them. Jun-ho raised a single finger, his left index finger. He did not look at Quan. He did not turn his head. The finger rose approximately 3 centimeters above the tablecloth, held its position for 1 second, and returned to the table. Quan stopped. His hand returned to his side. His face showed nothing, but his eyes locked onto Chad Beaumont with the focused, unblinking attention of a predator that had been told to wait, but not to forget. Jun-ho turned to Chad with the slow, economical movement of a man who does not waste energy on things that do not deserve it. His dark eyes settled on Chad's face the way a surgeon's gaze settles on a tumor. "Korean," Jun-ho said. His voice was quiet. Not soft. There is a difference. Soft is gentle. Quiet is what happens before an avalanche. And she is not anyone's girl. She has a name. Use it or do not speak to her. Chad laughed. It was the laugh of a man who had spent 34 years being insulated from consequences by his father's checkbook, his family's lawyers, and the invisible armor of a world built to protect men who looked exactly like him. It was the laugh of a man who did not recognize danger because he had never met it without a safety net beneath him. "Hey, easy there, buddy. It's a compliment. She's exotic. People like her don't usually get into places like this, if you know what I mean." What Chad Beaumont did not know, what his privilege had made it structurally impossible for him to know, was that the man sitting in front of him had killed his first man at the age of 17 in an alley behind a fish market in Busan. That he had built a criminal empire across 3 countries before the age of 30. That he had once sat across from a rival syndicate leader in Seoul and smiled for 45 minutes while his men dismantled the man's entire operation outside. And that when the meeting ended, Junho had stood, buttoned his jacket, and said only, "Thank you for the tea." The silence that followed Chad's words was not the silence of shock. It was the silence of a room recalculating. The guests nearby who had overheard suddenly became fascinated by their bread plates. A waiter who had been approaching with a bottle of Bordeaux reversed course so smoothly it looked choreographed. Junho looked at Chad for 3 seconds. 3 full seconds. In those 3 seconds, his face showed absolutely nothing. No anger, no amusement, no contempt. Nothing. And it was the nothing that made Chad's smile falter for the first time. Because humans are wired to read faces, and a face that shows nothing is a face that has decided something that cannot be undone. "I understand perfectly," Junho said. "Perfectly." Chad swallowed. Not from fear, not consciously, but from something older than consciousness, something buried in the lizard brain that evolution had installed specifically to recognize apex predators. He manufactured a laugh that convinced no one, least of all himself, and retreated into the crowd with his 2 interchangeable companions. Serena's fingers found the bracelet on her wrist. She turned it slowly, feeling the engraved Korean characters press against her fingertip. Unbreakable. She inhaled through her nose, held it for 4 counts, exhaled through her mouth. The technique she used before every performance. The technique that turned terror into focus and pain into precision. She looked at Junho. He was already looking at her. His expression had not changed, but something in his eyes had shifted. Something cold had moved behind them, like a glacier calving in the deep dark of an Arctic night. He was no longer counting cuts. He was calculating consequences. And the room, draped in crystal and silk and the ancient, perfumed arrogance of inherited wealth, had absolutely no idea that the most dangerous man it had ever contained had just moved from observation to execution. The dessert had not yet been served, and the evening's true course had not yet begun. The dessert arrived at 10:15. Creme brulee, individual porcelain ramekins with a caramelized sugar crust so perfectly torched that each one looked like a tiny amber mirror, reflecting the chandelier above. The waiters placed them with the same silent reverence they had maintained all evening. Each ramekin centered on each plate with millimetric precision, as though the alignment of dessert could somehow compensate for the misalignment of everything else that had happened at table 3. Serena did not touch hers. She sat with her hands folded on the white linen, her posture unchanged, her chin at the same level it had been since the moment she sat down. But something had shifted behind her eyes. The fire that had been burning there all evening had not gone out. It had done something worse. It had turned inward. It was consuming the walls she had spent a lifetime building, and she could feel them thinning with every breath. Junho noticed. He noticed the way her right thumb pressed against the inside of her left wrist, just above the bracelet. He noticed the way her breathing had changed from the controlled 4-count rhythm she used before performances to something shallower, faster, less architectural. He noticed the way she was looking at the untouched crème brûlée, as though it were a mirror showing her a reflection she did not want to see. He did not ask her what was wrong. He already knew. He had known since the moment Prescott Harrington said the word diversity with that particular inflection. He had known since Caroline Whitmore's surgically perfected lips formed the word compliant. He had known since Chad Beaumont's empty green eyes traveled down Serena's body, as though she were an item on a menu he had not ordered, but might sample anyway. What Junho did, instead of asking, was something so small that no one at the table registered it. He moved his left hand beneath the tablecloth and placed it, open and warm, on the chair beside Serena's thigh. Not touching her, not grabbing her, simply there, available. A silent architecture of presence that said, without words, without gesture, without performance, I am here. I see it. I see all of it. And it ends tonight. Serena felt the warmth of his hand near hers. She did not take it. She did not need to. The proximity was enough. The knowledge that someone in this room was counting the same wounds she was counting, and that he was not asking her to forgive them, was the only thing keeping the walls from collapsing entirely. At 10:27, Prescott Harrington III rose from his chair, adjusted his bow tie with the practiced vanity of a man who had been adjusting bow ties in mirrors since the age of 12, and walked to the stage. The spotlight found him immediately. It always did. The stage at the north end of the ballroom was elevated by 3 steps, flanked by arrangements of white orchids and draped in navy blue fabric embroidered with the Harrington family crest in silver thread. A podium stood at center stage with a microphone already adjusted to Prescott's height, because Prescott's height had been measured and communicated to the audio technician 3 days in advance. He tapped the microphone once. The room quieted. Not because Prescott commanded silence with his presence, but because the room had been trained, over decades of these galas, to perform attention at the appropriate moments. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome once again to the annual Harrington Foundation Charity Gala. Applause. Measured. Choreographed. The sound of 300 pairs of hands clapping in the key of obligation. Prescott smiled. It was the smile of a man who believed, with every fiber of his being, that the room loved him. What he did not understand, what men like Prescott Harrington never understand, is that the room did not love him. The room loved his money. The room loved his name. The room loved the proximity to a legacy that made their own legacies feel more legitimate. Prescott himself was merely the delivery mechanism, and delivery mechanisms are replaced the moment something more efficient arrives. He launched into the charity auction with the rehearsed enthusiasm of a man who had given this same speech, with minor variations, for the past 19 years. A painting by an emerging artist from Tribeca. Opening bid, $15,000. Sold for $22,000. A week on a private yacht in the Mediterranean. Opening bid, $40,000. Sold for $61,000. A private dinner with a Michelin-starred chef. Opening bid, $10,000. Sold for $18,000. Each sale punctuated by applause. Each applause punctuated by the quiet clink of champagne glasses and the softer, more insidious sound of self-congratulation. Junho watched from table 3. His creme brulee sat untouched, a twin to Serena's. His water glass was half full. His posture had not changed all evening. The same controlled, feline stillness that made it impossible to tell whether he was relaxed or coiled. But beneath the table, his left hand had moved from the chair to his pocket, where his phone rested with its screen dark and its notifications silenced. At 9:47, 30 minutes before dessert, a message had arrived from his attorney in Delaware. 4 words. It is done. Junho had read the message, locked the phone, and returned it to his pocket without changing his expression by a single degree. The acquisition of the majority stake in the Harrington Foundation had been finalized while Prescott was eating lamb, while Caroline was sharpening her next insult, while Chad was recovering from the first moment in his life that resembled genuine fear. The foundation had been bleeding for years. Not visibly, not in ways that showed up in the glossy annual reports or the photographs in society magazines. But beneath the surface, in the architecture of debt and obligation and deferred maintenance that held the Harrington legacy together, the cracks had been spreading. The board knew. The lawyers knew. The accountants knew. Prescott, wrapped in the cotton wool of denial and whiskey, did not know. Because knowing would have required the one thing he had never possessed: the willingness to look at something ugly and call it by its name. Junho had seen the cracks 6 months ago. He had not seen them by accident. He had looked for them, the way a predator looks for the limping animal at the edge of the herd. He had instructed his people to find every vulnerability, every outstanding loan, every deferred payment, every quiet desperation hidden behind the family crest. And when the picture was complete, when every crack had been mapped and every weakness cataloged, he had not acted immediately. He had waited. Because Park Junho understood something that most powerful men did not. The difference between revenge and justice is timing. He had planned to make the acquisition quietly. A business move, a strategic repositioning. He had not planned to make it personal. But then Prescott Harrington opened his mouth on that stage, and what came out was not a joke, was not a comment, was not even an insult in the traditional sense. What came out was something far worse. It was permission. Permission granted by a man with a microphone and a spotlight to an entire room of people who had been thinking the same thing all night, but had not yet found the courage to say it aloud. And now, ladies and gentlemen, the next item on the auction. Prescott paused, smiled. The smile of a man about to say something he considers clever. No, wait. The next one is already seated at table 3. Laughter. Not from everyone, but from enough. Enough mouths opened. Enough shoulders shook. Enough champagne rippled in enough glasses to fill the silence that should have existed with the sound of complicity. Prescott continued, riding the wave of his own perceived brilliance, his ruddy face flushed with whiskey and the intoxicating warmth of an audience that was laughing at the right moment. Just kidding, just kidding. But I must say, Mr. Park, you do have eclectic taste. Diversity is our strength, isn't that what they say? Although I do wonder if the young lady might be more comfortable performing on the stage rather than sitting among us. The sentence landed on the ballroom like a stone dropped into still water. The ripples spread outward in every direction, touching every table, every glass, every face. Some ripples carried horror. Some carried amusement. Most carried the thing that Serena had learned to fear more than cruelty itself: indifference. the shrug of a room that had heard something monstrous and decided, collectively and instantly, that it was not their problem. Prescott had said, in front of 312 witnesses, that Serena Mitchell's natural place was on the stage as entertainment, not at the table as an equal. He had said that her presence among them was an anomaly, a curiosity, a temporary disruption in the natural order of things. And he had said it with a smile, because smiles are the uniforms that cruelty wears to formal events. Serena felt every eye in the room turn toward her. 312 pairs. Some horrified, some entertained. Most simply watching, the way one watches a nature documentary, detached and analytical, waiting to see what the prey will do. She did not move. She did not drop her gaze. She did not reach for her water glass or her napkin or any of the small, familiar objects that people reach for when they need something to hold on to. She sat with her spine straight, her shoulders back, her chin level. Her hands folded on the tablecloth with the same deliberate stillness she maintained during the 4 measures of silence before the opening note of a concerto. Her eyes found Prescott on the stage, and she held his gaze with a dignity so absolute, so structural, so fundamentally unbreakable that it made the chandelier above her look fragile by comparison. A tear formed in the corner of her left eye. It gathered at the edge of her lash line, trembling, catching a light like a tiny diamond balanced on the edge of a cliff. She did not let it fall. She would not give them that. She would not give this room, this man, this moment, the satisfaction of her pain made visible. The tear held its position, suspended between gravity and will. And will won. What no one in that room could see, what no camera could capture and no witness could testify to, was the war being fought inside her. The exhaustion. The weight of 29 years of rooms like this one, of comments like this one, of smiles like this one. The cumulative, compounding, crushing weight of being measured, always and forever, by something she did not choose and would not change. Not because she could not, but because it was hers, and it was beautiful, and the world's inability to see that beauty was the world's failure, not hers. Beside her, Park Joon-ho placed his napkin on the table. The gesture was small, a square of white linen, folded once, placed to the left of his untouched dessert. It could have meant anything. A man finished with dinner, a man preparing to excuse himself, a man adjusting his place setting. But Kwan saw it, and Kwan's posture changed. His weight shifted from his heels to the balls of his feet. His right hand moved 3 centimeters closer to the inside of his jacket. His eyes locked onto Joon-ho with the absolute, unwavering focus of a soldier receiving orders. The second man, near the kitchen corridor, touched his earpiece and murmured 2 syllables in Korean. The third man, near the stage, uncrossed his arms. Joon-ho stood. He rose from his chair with the specific velocity of a man who has calculated exactly how fast he needs to move to achieve the maximum effect. Not fast enough to suggest urgency. Not slow enough to suggest hesitation. The exact speed of inevitability. The speed of a verdict being delivered. The speed of a door being closed that will never open again. He buttoned his jacket. A single button. The middle one. The gesture pulled the fabric taut across his shoulders and chest, and the tattoos on his neck seemed to shift and breathe with the movement. The dragons coiling, the waves cresting, the ancient characters rearranging themselves into a sentence that only Joon-ho could read. He walked toward the stage. Each step echoed in the silence that had settled over the ballroom like a velvet shroud. The orchestra had stopped playing. The waiters had frozen mid-stride. 312 people held their breath simultaneously, and the collective absence of exhalation created a vacuum in the room. A negative space that Junho filled with nothing but his presence and the sound of his Oxford shoes striking marble. Prescott watched him approach. The smile on his face underwent a transformation that happened in real time, visible to everyone in the room. Confidence became confusion. Confusion became uncertainty. Uncertainty became something that Prescott Harrington III had never felt in his 58 years of cushioned existence. Fear. Junho stopped at the foot of the stage. 3 steps separated them. Prescott stood above him, elevated by architecture, by name, by 3 generations of accumulated privilege. The dynamic should have favored the man on the stage, the higher ground, the microphone, the spotlight. It did not. From where Junho stood, looking up at Prescott with those dark, unreadable eyes, the 3 steps between them might as well have been a cliff that Prescott was standing on the edge of. And Junho was not climbing up. He was waiting for Prescott to fall. The silence in the grand ballroom had weight. It pressed down on every shoulder, settled into every chest, wrapped itself around every throat like an invisible hand tightening its grip 1 millimeter at a time. 312 people sat in their chairs as though the chairs had grown arms and were holding them in place. No one reached for a glass. No one adjusted a napkin. No one breathed loudly enough to be heard. Park Junho stood at the foot of the stage and looked up at Prescott Harrington III, the way a man looks at a clock that has already stopped ticking, but does not yet know it. "Give me the microphone." It was not a request. Requests contain the possibility of refusal. This sentence contained no such possibility. It was a statement of what was about to happen, delivered in a voice so calm, so measured, so utterly devoid of emotion that it bypassed the rational mind entirely and spoke directly to the survival instinct buried at the base of the human brainstem. Prescott's fingers tightened around the microphone. His eyes darted to the left, then to the right, scanning the room for an ally, a security guard, a board member, anyone whose face might say, "You do not have to do this." He found nothing. Every face in the room was watching him the way an audience watches the final act of a play they cannot leave. He handed over the microphone. His fingers released it with the reluctance of a man letting go of the last rung of a ladder, suspended over a darkness he cannot measure. The microphone passed from his soft, uncalloused hand to Junho's scarred one, and the transfer of that small black object carried more weight than every check that had ever been written at every Harrington Gala combined. Junho held the microphone in his left hand. The gold ring with the black ruby caught the spotlight and threw a single point of dark red light onto the stage floor, a tiny bloodstain made of refracted light. He did not step onto the stage. He did not need elevation. He had something that no stage could provide. He turned to Prescott, who was already retreating toward the navy blue curtain at the back of the stage, his patent leather shoes shuffling backward, with the graceless, instinctive movement of a man whose body understood the danger before his mind had finished processing it. "Stay," Junho said. 1 word, 1 syllable. Prescott stopped as though the word had been a wall materializing in front of him. His ruddy face had lost its color entirely. What remained was the gray, bloodless pallor of a man who has just discovered that the ground beneath his feet belongs to someone else. Junho turned to the ballroom. "Good evening." The voice was calm, almost warm, amplified by the microphone, but restrained in volume, as though he were having a private conversation that 300 people happened to be overhearing. "My name is Park Junho. Many of you know me. Some of you do business with me. Others do business with me without knowing it. I will not take much of your time." He paused. His eyes found Serena across the room. She was sitting at table 3, exactly as she had been sitting all evening, spine erect, chin level, hands folded. But her eyes were different now. They were not burning with restrained fury. They were wide, alert, uncertain, because she did not know what was coming. And Park Joon-ho had never once given her reason to doubt him. But she had also never seen him stand in front of 300 people with a microphone in his hand, and that particular absence of expression on his face. "I brought someone with me tonight," Joon-ho continued. "Serena Mitchell, violoncellist. Graduated from the Juilliard School. Not through diversity. Not through a quota. Not through a special program designed to make institutions feel better about themselves. Through merit. Through the kind of talent that makes an entire concert hall stop breathing." He turned to Prescott. The older man flinched, a small, involuntary contraction of the shoulders, the body's confession of what the mouth refused to say. "You suggested she should be on this stage performing rather than seated among you, as though her place were to serve, as though she were here by accident, as though the color of her skin were an error in your dress code." The word skin detonated in the silence like a depth charge. It sank through the layers of politeness, through the champagne and the crystal and the white linen and the silver cutlery, and it exploded at the bottom, in the place where the truth lived, in the place that every person in this room had agreed, through decades of silent consensus, never to visit. Prescott opened his mouth. His lips moved. No sound emerged. His jaw worked the way a fish's jaw works when it has been pulled from the water, opening and closing around nothing, producing nothing, because there was nothing to produce. Every sentence he had ever used to defend himself required an audience that was willing to believe him, and that audience had evaporated. Joon-ho took one step toward him, a single step. The distance between them decreased by approximately 70 centimeters, and Prescott retreated by twice that, his back now touching the navy blue curtain, the Harrington family crest in silver thread pressing against his shoulder blades like a brand. "I grew up on the streets of Busan," Joon-ho said. He lowered the microphone slightly, but the silence was so complete that his voice carried to the farthest corners of the room without amplification. "I know what it is to enter a room where no one believes you belong. I know what it is to be measured by your face before you are heard by your voice. The difference between me and her is that when people underestimated me, the consequences were immediate." He raised the microphone again. "But I am not here to make threats. I am here to make an announcement." Joon-ho reached into the inside pocket of his jacket. The movement was slow, deliberate, visible. Every security instinct in the room fired simultaneously. Kwan's hand moved toward his jacket. The man near the stage shifted his weight. 2 guests at table 7 instinctively leaned backward. Joon-ho removed his phone. He dialed a number, pressed the speaker icon, held the phone near the microphone so that the sound would carry through the ballroom's speaker system. The phone rang once. Kwan's voice answered, deep and flat and stripped of everything that was not information. "Confirmed, sir. The acquisition of the majority stake in the Harrington Foundation was finalized at 9:47 this evening. Transfer validated. Documents are with legal." The voice echoed through the ballroom like a funeral bell. Each word struck a different surface, a different ear, a different understanding. Acquisition. Majority stake. Harrington Foundation. Finalized. Prescott's face underwent a transformation so complete and so visible that it would be remembered by every person in that room for the rest of their lives. The gray pallor turned white. The small blue eyes, which had spent the entire evening half closed in perpetual judgment, opened wide. Wider than they had opened in decades, until the whites were visible all around the irises like two small moons trapped in a face that was collapsing from the inside. "What?" The word came out as a whisper, dry and cracked, and stripped of every ounce of authority it had ever carried. That is not possible. The foundation is my family's, since 1962. Junho completed. His voice was patient, almost kind, the way a doctor's voice is kind when delivering a diagnosis that cannot be appealed. I know. I also know the Foundation carries debts your annual reports do not mention. I know your endowment has been underperforming for 7 consecutive years. I know your board has been quietly seeking a buyer since last March. I simply facilitated. He pocketed the phone. Effective tomorrow morning, the Harrington Foundation will have a new director of cultural programs. Her name is Serena Mitchell. She will decide who performs, who exhibits, who receives grants and scholarships. And I can guarantee that she will not judge anyone by their appearance. At table 3, Serena's composure broke. Not shattered, not collapsed. Broke the way dawn breaks, slowly, irreversibly, light flooding into a space that had been dark for so long that it had forgotten what illumination felt like. Her eyes widened, her lips parted. Her hands, still folded on the tablecloth, trembled once. A single vibration that traveled through her fingers like the aftershock of something seismic. She had not known. Junho had not told her. He had carried this secret the way he carried everything, silently, strategically, with the patience of a man who understood that the most powerful gifts are the ones that arrive at the exact moment they are needed most. Junho looked at her across the ballroom, and for the first time that evening, for the first time in longer than anyone in that room could have guessed, his face changed. The mask of controlled, lethal neutrality softened by a degree so small that only Serena could have detected it. It was not a smile. It was something rarer than a smile. It was recognition. The look of a man who sees another person completely, without filter, without judgment, without condition, and who says, with his eyes alone, "I see you. I see everything you carry, and I will not let them take it from you." He turned back to the room. His eyes found Caroline Whitmore, whose triple strand of pearls rose and fell with breathing that had become rapid and shallow, whose champagne glass sat on the table where she had placed it, with a hand that was no longer steady. He found Chad Beaumont, who was standing near the bar with his 2 interchangeable companions, all 3 of them frozen in a tableau of dawning comprehension. The slow, terrible understanding that the world contains consequences, and that those consequences had just entered the room, wearing a black suit and a black ruby ring. I purchased 4 tables tonight, $200,000. I have also donated $1.5 million to the new phase of the foundation. My foundation, now. Every cent will fund music scholarships for young people who were never given a chance. He paused. The pause lasted 3 seconds. 3 seconds in which the only sound in the grand ballroom of the Waldorf Astoria was the almost imperceptible hum of the chandelier's electrical current. 20,000 crystal pieces vibrating at a frequency that only silence could reveal. And so that we are perfectly clear, Junho turned to Prescott. He walked up the 3 steps of the stage. Each step was precise, unhurried, final. He stood in front of Prescott Harrington III, close enough that the older man could see every line of every tattoo on Junho's neck, every scale on every dragon, every crest on every wave, every character in every ancient word that had been inscribed on his skin as a permanent record of where he came from and what he had survived to become. He lowered the microphone, held it at his side, and spoke directly into Prescott's ear, but loud enough that the tables nearest the stage caught every syllable. And those syllables would be repeated, whispered, texted, and remembered for years to come. One more word about her skin, and it is your last. The sentence was not a threat. Threats are promises that may or may not be kept. This was a fact. A simple, architectural, load-bearing fact delivered by a man who had never in his life made a promise he did not fulfill, and who was not about to begin breaking that record in a ballroom in Manhattan on a Tuesday evening in October. Prescott Harrington III did not speak again for the remainder of the night. He stood on that stage for 11 seconds after Junho descended the steps, his mouth slightly open, his bow tie suddenly looking less like an accessory and more like a noose that had not yet tightened. Then he walked off the stage, through the service corridor, past the kitchen, and into a private bathroom where he locked the door and sat on the closed lid of a toilet and stared at the tile floor while his legacy dissolved around him like sugar in boiling water. Caroline Whitmore left 23 minutes later, citing a migraine. Her clutch trembled in her hand as she walked to the exit. She did not say goodbye to anyone. Her triple strand of pearls caught the light one final time as she passed through the door, and then she was gone, absorbed by a night that did not care about her name or her husband's title or the number of committees she chaired. Chad Beaumont remained. He stood at the bar for another 40 minutes, drinking champagne that no longer tasted like celebration, staring at a point on the far wall, processing, for the first time in his 34 years, the revolutionary concept that his mouth could produce sounds that his body could not afford. Junho returned to table 3. He sat beside Serena. He moved her chair half a centimeter closer to his, a gesture so small that the human eye could barely register it, but that Serena felt the way a seismograph feels the tremor of a continent shifting beneath the ocean floor. "You bought his foundation," she said. Her voice trembled, not with weakness, with the specific vibration of a structure that has absorbed an enormous force and is recalibrating its entire architecture to accommodate a new reality. "I planned the acquisition," Junho replied. "I did not plan for them to be so predictable. Although, I should have." "Junho." "Yes?" "I don't need you to save me." He looked at her. He studied her face the way he studied everything, with the patient, thorough attention of a man who never made decisions based on incomplete information. Then he nodded. A single, slow inclination of his head. "I know. You do not need it. But I wanted to, and I always do what I want." Serena laughed. A real laugh. The first real sound she had made all evening that was not filtered through composure or calculation or the exhausting, lifelong performance of dignity in rooms that did not deserve it. The laugh rose from somewhere deep inside her, from the place where the walls had thinned all evening, and instead of collapsing, those walls opened like windows, and the laugh flew through them and filled the space between her and Junho with something that no amount of money or power or crystal chandeliers could manufacture. Joy. When they left at 11:40, Serena stopped on the marble staircase outside the hotel. The Manhattan night was cold and clear. The Rolls-Royce Phantom waited at the curb, black and silent, its engine purring with the low, patient rumble of a sleeping predator. Junho, what does the bracelet say? The full translation. You never told me. He looked at the bracelet on her wrist, touched the inscription with his thumb, tracing the Korean characters the way a blind man reads a promise written in a language older than memory. 부서지지 않는 사람. 부서지지 않는 사람. The person who does not break. Serena looked at him for a long moment. The city moved around them, indifferent, eternal. 10 million lives flowing past in the dark. Then why did I almost break in there? Junho took her face in both hands. Hands that had built empires and destroyed them. Hands that had held weapons and signed contracts and ended conversations that could not be ended any other way. Hands that trembled now, almost imperceptibly, because holding Serena Mitchell's face was the only act in his entire life that required courage he was not certain he possessed. Almost, he said. Almost does not count. You stood. You stood the entire night. And tomorrow, when you sit in that director's chair, you will stand again. Serena let the tear fall. Finally, one tear, a single drop that traveled down her deep, dark, luminous skin, like a diamond sliding down a surface made of night. It caught the streetlight as it fell, and for one brief, perfect instant, it contained the entire city in its reflection. Junho caught it with his thumb. Then he pressed his lips to her forehead, a gesture so foreign to the man the world called the Viper, that his 3 men, standing at their posts near the car, looked away simultaneously, not out of discomfort, but out of respect for something they understood they were not meant to witness. They entered the car. The door closed. The Phantom pulled away from the curb with the silent, inevitable momentum of a story reaching its final sentence. The next morning, Prescott Harrington III woke to the sound of his phone ringing. His attorney. The transfer was real. The foundation was gone. 3 generations of name, prestige, and carefully curated legacy had been purchased by an orphan from Busan with dragons tattooed on his neck and a woman from Brooklyn seated at his side. And for the first time in his 58 years of privilege, Prescott William Harrington III felt the thing that Serena Elise Mitchell had felt every single day of her life. The crushing, suffocating, inescapable weight of not belonging. The chandelier in the grand ballroom still hung from its original chain. 20,000 pieces of hand-cut crystal from Vienna, installed in 1923, witness to a century of secrets. It had seen everything. It had judged nothing. But if crystal could remember, it would remember this: that on an October evening in Manhattan, a woman who was told she did not belong sat with her chin raised and her spine straight and did not break. And a man who the world called a viper loved her not because she was fragile, but because she was the strongest thing he had ever seen. And together, they were what the bracelet said: unbreakable. Serena didn't break because she already knew who she was. But what about you? If you watched this story and felt something stir inside you, if you've ever sat in a room where they tried to make you feel like you didn't belong, if you've ever smiled on the outside while something died inside, that wasn't weakness. It was survival. But survival isn't the same as living up to your expectations. There's a 30-day reset created specifically for Black women over 45 who are ready to stop settling for less, to learn to see manipulation before it takes hold, rebuild the standards life has taught you to lower, and return to yourself with clarity. It's not a promise of overnight transformation. It's a return to your own self-awareness, to your dignity, to the woman who should never have doubted herself. Scan the QR code on the screen now, or access the link pinned in the comments. Because the Serena in your life is you. If this story moved you, stop for a moment and reflect. Have you ever walked into a room and felt every eye measuring you before you even opened your mouth? Have you ever been judged not by your talent, not by your character, not by the life you built with your own hands, but by something you were born with and would never change? And have you ever had someone, just one person, who saw you completely and stood beside you when the world tried to make you feel invisible? Tell us your experiences and feelings in the comments. We read them all. And if you believe in stories about dignity, justice, and unbreakable love, leave a like, be sure to subscribe to the channel, and click join to become a part of our community and help the channel.